In this section, we are going to begin with an introduction to data center virtualization with vSphere. As we break into our vSphere with an intro to vSphere, we are going to cover some of the core topics that we're going to be definitely getting into. So the first of which we're going to be taking a look at is going to be why we need data center virtualization. We're also going to take a look at what are virtual machines and their capabilities, some of the vSphere capabilities that are applicable to this particular exam, and then VMware's vision, and that is the move to IT as a service model at each layer. This will include infrastructure, applications, and end user access. So, what is virtualization? Well, virtualization is the process of creating virtual versions of physical components. So, this will include both servers, storage, networking, desktop, and applications. So, the idea here is when you have say you have 10 servers, and each one of those servers is running a single OS and a single application. And they all have CPU, memory, network, and storage that are attached to them in some fashion or form to whatever capabilities you have set them up for. If you were to take a look over a period of time at the utilization of each one of those servers, you'll find that in most cases that those servers aren't running very hard ever. 15-20% is pretty typical for what I see in most environments. Well, what that basically does is your servers aren't being used to their full potential. So the idea with server virtualization, and this is what this course is mainly designed to work on, is the idea of taking and breaking down and consolidating 10 servers into one. So what I mean by doing this is when you're breaking down several servers into one, you're basically going through and consolidating multiple operating systems that can run on a single physical server. Each one of these has access to CPU, RAM, storage, and network. And the nice thing about it is each VM is unaware that they are running as a VM. As I demonstrated in the previous video, you couldn't tell that computer that I was remote desktoping into was a VM until I physically pointed it out. And the nice thing about it is each VM is unaware they are sharing resources. Because when you dig into it, ESXi itself is an abstraction layer. What that basically means is it takes the sum of all of the resources available to the host and it allows you to, on a per VM basis, basically, I want to use the term divvy up or give a set amount of resources to each VM based on whatever requirements you deem appropriate. So that's the idea behind it. So with server virtualization, the server doesn't know it's a VM, and you can run as many server VMs as you have resources to support on that particular host. Some of the networking capabilities that you have available to you that are available, one of which is the Nexus 1000V. You can do the vSphere standard and vSphere distributed switches. You also can run NSX, and I've had extensive experience on both the CSR 1000V and the ASAV. If you're not familiar with the Nexus 1000V or the VSS, that's okay. The Nexus 1000V is utilized inside of the virtual data center, and basically what Nexus 1000V does is it gives you the ability of taking Nexus, and each one of the ESXi servers you have, I believe, shows up as a line card inside the Nexus. I don't know much more about it beyond that, but it basically allows you to use Nexus inside of the virtual environment. VSS and VDS, obviously vSphere standard switches are going to be installed as a default when you install an ESXi host. The vSphere distributed switch is a vCenter only capability, and we'll talk about that more later on when we get into our vCenter deployment. And then NSX is utilized to basically configure virtual networking on top of your ESXi environment. So it's actually pretty cool once you dig into it, but that is some of the capabilities that you have available to you. The CSR, or the Cloud Services Router, is utilized to basically give you the ASR platform, the aggregation services router, the CSR is a virtualized compile of that. So it's IOSXE inside of ESX. So basically is what you're looking at. So as a matter of fact, when you look at my virtual environment, some of the CSRs are running inside of that. Then we also have the ability to virtualize storage. Storage, in our case, I'm using Starwind software in a couple different characteristics. I'm also going to, I'll explain what I mean by that here in a moment. I have OpenFiler configured to, or will be configuring OpenFiler to as an iSCSI target and as an NFS capability inside of my virtual environment. Once we get a little farther along into shared storage in our series, we also have the ability of running vSAN, and another variation of this is EMC's VNX, where you can it's a virtual machine. It's an OVA, which is basically just an export of a virtual machine from a virtual environment that you can import, and it runs the VNX software capabilities, which is one of the EMC's storage solutions. And vSAN is taking a cluster of 3 ESXi hosts that you have enabled vSAN on, and what you do is you take, if you don't have like a shared storage capability, you don't have OpenFiler, you don't have Starwind software, you use vSAN to take the directly attached storage and make it look like it's shared storage. So you can basically, it's called hyperconverged, which basically means that you can take a hard drive that's plugged into a host and make it look like it is a iSCSI target that is, available. And sorry about that. So that is some of the capabilities you have for doing storage virtualization. The next one we're going to talk about is applications virtualization, and an example of that would be Citrix. If you're familiar with Citrix, with their ability of doing the virtualizing like Microsoft Word or remote desktop. I mean, they have a bunch of different capabilities that you can use for Citrix. But you can do like GoToMeeting. I know Citrix has a bunch of different capabilities for doing that type of stuff. And then applications running on a virtual machine. So like for instance, you could take a VM and you can virtualize, you can have a VM created and allow remote desktop services to it. And then you can allow like a VDI is one capability that you can do. Or it's a variation of application virtualization. The next one we're going to take a look at is desktop. VMware's Horizon View, which is actually going to sit on top of what the vSphere environment we're actually deploying. Horizon View, actually the company I work for, we are a VMware and Cisco reseller. When I'm at work, I have a IBM, I believe it's an IBM, maybe an HP, I don't remember. I don't sit at my desk very often. Basically, it's a thin client. And the thin client it's basically just an endpoint that allows me to plug in a monitor, keyboard, a mouse, and a network cable into, and it allows me to use that guy to connect into a VDI. My VDI uses Horizon View. So we have several virtual desktops configured inside of our virtual environment to utilize that. We have several customers that utilize Horizon View. Horizon View is a solution that VMware provides to where you can virtualize desktops. So instead of giving everybody a dedicated laptop or a dedicated desktop, you can give them a virtual environment, a VDI, and then a WYSE, W-Y-S-E, or an IBM thin client that they can use to connect into the virtual environment. So basically, all the VDI, it basically uses a concept known as PC over IP. And PC over IP basically it's KVM over IP. So it's keyboard, video, mouse over IP. And I've noticed that it's not quite as reactive as it will be with a regular desktop. Like my computer, when I move my mouse, it moves. Where VDI, you actually have to send the bits that are telling the VDI to move the mouse, and they're, at least in my experience, it's a little less responsive than it would be for a regular computer. So since we've covered desktop, or the next one we're going to talk about is VDI, which basically is Horizon View. There are other capabilities that are out there as well, where, like I said, you can do what they call a P to V, or a physical to virtual, which means you take a physical computer and you virtualize it using the VMware Converter software. So you take a computer that is already operational, operating system, its configuration, and then you virtualize it into your ESXi environment, and then you can give a say for instance you have salespeople. This is very common for them that travel. You can give them a laptop instead of having them a dedicated desktop or something like that. They have a laptop that you can give them so that they can be on the move or what have you, and you take their hardware desktop, you virtualize it into your ESXi environment, and then you allow them to remote desktop into it. So they pull up a RDP connection, they dial into it, and then they have their desktop computer, and away they go. So it's just what they had been using in the office. This way here, they don't have to go in there and wait for updates and all other stuff. It's already taken care of for them. And then we have terminal services. I'm not really going to get into terminal services simply for the fact that that is a pretty much I never deal with it, but it is a capability. Basically, terminal services is exactly what I just described in taking a salesperson's desktop and virtualizing it into the ESXi environment. Microsoft does allow the ability of using terminal services to where you can have a computer as a terminal server, and you can have several or like a jump box to where you can have a lot of customers I know give me the ability to remote desktop into a dedicated computer which has access to their entire network, instead of giving me access into a bunch of different computers in their environment. They give me a jump box as a central point of management for them. And then we have things for the cloud. Data center virtualization is actually the fundamental computing platform for cloud. So if you want to run a cloud, you need a data center server virtualized environment in order to run that. So the VMware vRealize suite, actually I misspelled that, gives you that capability. I'll fix that. So it's a cloud management platform. So basically you can automate infrastructure very, very easily into that. The next one is also going to be vSphere provides Openstack API for big data extensions. So, for instance, you can basically, if you have an app dev team, you can use this to allow them to deploy and maintain an OpenStack infrastructure up in the cloud. So, like for instance, you might have, let me think here for a moment. You might have vCloud Air, which is basically VMware's cloud, if you, for lack of a better term, that's exactly what it is. VMware's cloud, vCloud Air. You go in and you're able to run vSphere allows you to run OpenStack inside of vCloud Air to allow you to run things like Hadoop. And Hadoop is, I don't know much about Hadoop, but if you're a developer, that's big news for that.